Hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining me today. Today I'm going to be walking and hiking around the hills and mountains and hopefully getting a few nice photographs. But what I want to talk about today is the difficulty I sometimes face with my lens choice when I'm out in the hills and mountains. Now, photography is very subjective. There's no real rules. We all prefer different types of photographs. We all prefer different gear, different camera equipment and so on. But personally for me, I think out of all the different types of locations that I visit, definitely when it comes to lens choice, I find it hardest to decide what I'm going to bring with me when I'm out in the hills and mountains. So that's what I want to talk about today. Just give you my views. Other people may disagree, of course, but I think it makes for an interesting topic. So time to head on and we'll cover this more. So the wind is picking up quite strong, and this tree here, as some of the others do in the area, has got quite a lean to it in this direction. So that's a telltale sign that the wind mainly blows in this direction. Equipment failure is never a good thing, but when filming a YouTube video it is particularly frustrating. At this point my audio recorder was seemingly working fine, but unknown to me it was on its way to failing and needing to be replaced. When reviewing the audio on my computer I found it had filled it with all manner of unpleasant crackles, hisses and pops, so this video will have two voiceover sections, of which this is one. Back to the topic of this video, and I was mentioning that although I have owned a number of different cameras with different sensor sizes, to keep things simple for this video, when I discuss focal length and lenses, it will be in full frame terms. Regardless of which camera I own, my preference has always been to have 4 different lenses: an ultra wide angle lens, a 24 to 70mm lens, a 70 to 200mm lens, then finally something which offers a much longer focal length up to say 400 or even 600mm. When it comes to photography up in the hills and mountains, I need to keep the weight of my gear down, and I always find it difficult to choose which lenses I want to bring with me. Lens choice for other types of landscape photography is much easier for me. Based on my experience over the years, I've made a few estimates, and I know for woodland photography, a 24 to 70mm lens will be used for in excess of 90% of my images. If I go to the coast, I'll use the 24 to 70 around 80% of the time, and I may bring one more lens with me. If I was driving around in my car looking for photographs, weight isn't an issue, but I like to cover the 24 to 200mm focal length range, and I know 90% of the time I won't need anything else. These are just a few examples to show how normally lens choice is fairly simple for me, except for when it comes to hiking in the hills and mountains. So I've just stopped. I'm making good progress, and it may be too small to see in the camera, but there's a bird of prey behind me here just hovering, so I'm quite enjoying watching that. This bird's looking for some food. Unfortunately I don't have a lens with me that's long enough to capture any meaningful photograph of it, so I'll leave it to go about its business, and I'll talk more about the difficulties I have with lens choice up in the hills and mountains. So why is that? Well, simply for me, I find that when I'm up in the hills and mountains, more than any other location by far, I always find that I could use all 4 of the lenses that I've just mentioned, so covering everything of focal lengths from say 16mm up to 400 or 600. I just find that on different days, quite often they would all be very useful to me. And I don't really find that in other locations. I gave you some averages earlier of how much I use various lenses in various types of locations. That's just based on the years of photography that I've done. I would say those percentages I gave are fair reflections, but when I'm up in hills and mountains it's totally different, and I'm never quite sure what I want to leave behind once I head off to spots such as this. Often when I'm climbing up a hill or mountain, I find that en route the 24 to 70mm lens serves me quite well. It just fits what I want to photograph, and perhaps there's some interesting rocks or a cairn at the top as well, and you want to shoot wide angle, take that in with some of the surrounding countryside. Or there can be scenes where you want to zoom in a little bit, focus on a more specific area, take in less to your frame, and the 24 to 70 works very well for that. But often I've found some really interesting foregrounds at the top of mountains, some really interesting rock structures, or simply a large area that I want to take in, and I'm going for that unique ultra wide angle look. So you need an ultra wide angle focal length to achieve that, and maybe maximize your foreground and perhaps take in the elements that you want to your scene. Of course, I've been up some hills and mountains, the foreground isn't that interesting, or there's more interest further away in the surrounding countryside, the surrounding hills and mountains. So that's when I switch to the telephoto lens. But often stopping at 200mm is not enough. I want more focal length. I want to zoom in more. It could be something I've seen on a hillside. It could just be that the surrounding hills and mountains are so far away. I really want to isolate part of what I can see all around me, and I need a much longer focal length for that. It could be 300mm, it could be 500, 600, whatever it is. But I generally find that when I'm out hiking in the hills and mountains, I just wish I could take those 4 lenses that I mentioned earlier with me. But of course my back's not going to thank me for doing that. It just isn't practical, and you're just going to get tired much more easily and find it harder work. So that's the sort of dilemma that I face. But I'll talk in a little bit about generally how I approach deciding on which lenses I want to take with me, and I'll continue my climb. Eventually I reached the top, and as often the case, the wind was quite strong. Even though it may not always make the best photograph of my day, I like to take a photograph of the summit cairn, and that is what I did here. Photography isn't always about capturing portfolio level images, it can be about capturing memories. There wasn't a lot of cloud cover in the sky, but I did manage to capture an image with a nice arrangement of clouds. Near the end of this video I captured 2 more images which I am really pleased with. I was lucky to witness something quite special, so stay tuned for that. For now, here is the image that I took here. I found a little bit of shelter now, so I'm going to finish up talking about my lens choice for when I'm up in the hills and mountains and why I think it's so difficult. So generally, how do I decide which lens or lenses am I going to take with me? Well, I think if you've been up a specific hill or mountain before and you're very familiar with it, that can help a little bit, but it's not going to always help you pick the perfect set of lenses or the perfect lens to take with you. For example, you may have seen a scene at the top which you quite like, shot at say 30-40mm, taking in some interesting rocks and some interesting hills off the background. And maybe you didn't get good light one day and you want to return and take it when the light is better. So next time you could go up, even though the forecast is promising, because the conditions change so much in the hills and mountains, that distant backdrop to your image, which your image relies on, it's a key part of your image, could be shrouded in cloud and you may not even see the distant hills or countryside. So On a different day you may turn and look behind you and you see something way off which actually will work, but it maybe requires, say, a 200mm focal length or a 400mm focal length or whatever. So definitely being familiar with a hill or mountain helps, but it's not always going to guarantee you can head up bringing the perfect lens or the perfect set of lenses. So what I generally try and do is, if I know it's going to be a very difficult climb and I want to save as much weight as possible, if I was only taking one lens and going for my best quality images, I would always take my 24-70. It's a great general purpose lens. Following on from that, if I think I can manage carrying another lens, I will then take the 70-200 in addition to the 24-70. So those are my primary choices. I always think that's going to help me get a lot of shots between 24 and 200mm. After that, it really comes down to your own preferences or what you think. Could you also carry an ultra wide angle lens? If so, that will be the third lens that I carry. My fourth choice, and one which I probably only carry up on its own most of the time, or perhaps in partnership with one other lens, would be the super telephoto. So say something that zooms into 400 or 600mm. That would be my final choice. Just because it's so heavy, I don't always carry that, but I have gotten some excellent images from the top of hills or mountains or on the way up or down, shot at say 400-500mm. So I do find that lens very useful, but it's very difficult. You can't carry everything, but as I say, when I'm up in the hills and mountains, I always find that I could utilize every lens that I've talked about today. So those are the four lenses that I've always favoured having. I like to cover that focal length range. I think it's a fairly common or a classic setup for landscape photography. We've got the ultra wide angle, we've got the 24-70, we've got the 70-200, and more optionally a super telephoto. And I think that covers my needs well, but of course there's various other options. Some people may say they only carry an ultra wide angle, too wide angle, and that covers their needs. Some people may carry that in a telephoto. Some people may carry ultra wide angle, telephoto, and bridge the gap with a 50mm prime to save weight. There's a lot of options, but I really like having a wide focal length range. And as I say, in the hills and mountains, I always find that I would just love to have all four of those lenses with me, but unfortunately it's not possible. Now, of course, for example, on my Nikon Z7 II, I've got a 24-200 lens, a super zoom, and it's really good. It's light, it's not too expensive in terms of lens prices, and I can shoot a lot of the way without changing lenses. But of course it doesn't cover the entire focal length range that I like to have or would like to have in the hills and mountains, and it really depends on your needs. Some people, if they're not viewing their images too large and they're only sharing them online, that may provide excellent image quality. But if you're doing photography professionally, of course that lens can take photographs that you can sell. But perhaps for some people, depending on how you view things, if you want to print really large and you're charging money for your photographs and you want to put forward as good quality images as you can, and you really inspect your prints and so on, you may start to see with a super zoom some softness at the edges and corners. And if you think that's not acceptable or it's not what you want for your own work, you're then forced into carrying maybe more lenses or heavier lenses, more expensive lenses. So there's a lot of things for me to consider when I'm up in the hills and mountains, and as I say, it's only my views. There's no right and wrong in photography. Other people will have a totally different approach and think they can head into the hills and mountains and shoot with one lens and they can always capture the images that they want. But for me, I think I would really benefit if I could always have those four lenses with me, but unfortunately that's not possible, so I need to make some educated decisions. But for now, I've seen a scene that I want to photograph. I'm a little bit concerned about the light. We've got some beautiful sunlight, but there's also an awful lot of haze. So I'm going to go back and have a look at this scene and hopefully capture a nice image to finish off the day. So it's much later now, and I'm at the place where I want to be to take my final photograph of the day. And probably an hour and a half ago, 3 hours ago, 4 hours ago, it was extremely hazy off in this direction for a long period. But now I'm pleased to say the haze has pretty much gone and it's got a really nice look to it. The sun is almost dipping behind the hills. We've got about half an hour to go until sunset. But I've got my shot framed up. The composition looks good to me. We've got some decent light at the moment. There's a little bit of colour just starting in the sky. So fingers crossed I'm going to get a nice image to finish off the day with. But I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. It's been interesting for me to talk about the dilemmas that I face with lens choice when I'm off in the hills and mountains. As I say, it's only my view. Other people may have a different opinion, but that's fine. We all see things slightly differently when we take photographs. We like to use different gear, different focal lengths, different ideas for composition and so on, and it's always nice to share our thoughts. But as always, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. I'm now going to stay here until the sun sets, and I'm going to take a few images of the scene behind me. So I'll show you my favourite one to end the video. But as I say, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it, and I hope to see you in my next one. I'm really pleased with this image as I feel it captures a lot of the atmosphere which I felt on this special evening. Later, as it got closer to sunset, I began to notice something special happening to the sun and sky, and I took this shot.